This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, we now bring you a discussion on India and the Commonwealth. The participants are A.N. Ram, former diplomat, and Rahul Jalali, senior journalist.
It's like a Hobson's choice. Will Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh go to Colombo to attend the CHOGM meet, or won't he? There is intense pressure on him, essentially from the Tamil parties. But there is an equally strong segment which feels that domestic issues should not drive Indian foreign policy. There are many issues which he can lay stress on. There is a formula which is also being talked about, that he first goes to Jaffna and then goes on to Colombo. Whatever the case might be, Ambassador Ram, what do you think we should do and where are we caught?
Rahul, there are two aspects to this important visit. One is the substantive aspect and the other is the symbolic aspect, should we say, for want of a better expression. Substantively, the agenda of this CHOGM meeting does not necessarily require the presence of our Prime Minister, because there are no such issues of epoch-making proportions for which the head of government needs to be there. But it has been the practice, and the Prime Minister and certainly India as a founding member of the Commonwealth has always tried to attend the CHOGM meetings. As far as the symbolic aspect is concerned, the presence or absence of our Prime Minister from a meeting sends a very loud and clear message. Whatever that message may be is conditioned by the context in which the visit is taking place. I would like to think that in this case too, while substantively there may not be anything much to be expected from India's perspective from this CHOGM meeting, symbolically India could either choose to send a strong message to the government of Sri Lanka, or by attending choose to ignore the whole issue for maintaining the priorities of our neighborhood foreign policy. Having said that, let me also add within parenthesis that this tendency of domestic considerations spilling over into foreign policy calculus is a somewhat new one. It happened in the case of Bangladesh not so long ago. It has happened before in the case of Sri Lanka. It has happened also in the case of Nepal, I believe, in one or two cases, smaller, of lesser proportion though. And I think we'll have to now take a call on whether in a federal setup such as ours, we should be immune from domestic pressures in foreign policy formulation, or we should take them on board.
One issue which comes into mind straight away is the diminishing importance of CHOGM as a multilateral body. One, because if you look at the debate around Prime Minister's participation in Colombo in the CHOGM meet, is not about his going to a CHOGM meet and its importance, but it's been reduced to a bilateral issue in terms of Indo-Sri Lanka relationship. Secondly, there is essentially the Tamil question. Does India take a strong position by not going to Sri Lanka on the Tamil issue? We have issues with Sri Lankan government. And third, which is the issue you just mentioned, is that now we seem to be moving towards a trend where multilateral issues seem to be overshadowed by our domestic compulsions. Is it good for a country like India, which claims that we are a regional power, for this to happen? And if we need to isolate or insulate this, what needs to be done?
Rahul, foreign policy is as much dictated by national interests which are inseparably linked to geography, to history, to traditional links, to compulsions of neighborhood, as for example, India-Sri Lanka relations. So I wouldn't overplay that particular aspect, although it is certainly true that should India not be there, there will be others who will try to fish into that water. But that is the reason for which possibly the Prime Minister's visit is so important. Either visit takes place or doesn't take place. As far as the domestic imperatives of our foreign policy are concerned, they are casting a shadow on the foreign policy formulation. I think it is only right and proper. Frankly speaking, we have all these years, 50, 60 years, run our foreign policy establishment on the premise that, unmindful of the opinion of the people, we can do what we like in the national interest, of course, and the country will accept it. For the first time, we realized that may not be so. Bangladesh was a case in point when Bangladesh was happening at that time. Tamil feelings on Sri Lanka is a case in point again. The impact of the UP neighboring regions on politics of Nepal is a fact of life. And likewise, there are also, of course, our northeastern states which also have implications for our Look East policy and beyond. So I would like to think that factoring domestic considerations into foreign policy is now a must. It's a necessity, must be done, particularly for economic reasons and strategic and political reasons. Everything has cross-border dimensions today. The domestic constituents of India must realize that this is ultimately the constitutional responsibility of the central government to take decisions on foreign policy issues. So I think there should be a happy meeting ground. There should be consultations toing and froing between the federal government and the units of the constituencies. And after that, a fair decision acceptable to all must be concerned. It is not necessary that the most popular decision is always the most correct decision.
That's true, but there seems to be a feeling in a lot of quarters, especially some retired diplomats who are your ex-colleagues. You see, these are majorly domestic and that too segmented political considerations which are preventing the country to move forward with a foreign policy initiative. The case of Bangladesh water sharing also is a case in point. This was just one region and a particular chief minister from that region who put her foot down. There is an argument which seems to suggest that almost all the Tamil parties, including the Congress legislators plus member parliaments, are putting forward this point of view of the Prime Minister not travelling to Sri Lanka. Many of the commentators have compared it to what happened a few years ago when the Prime Minister did go. But Tamil parties, after initial outbursts, kept quiet, especially the DMK. Do you think that in cases where narrow sectoral political interests force the government to abandon a foreign policy initiative, in that context, how do you respond?
I'm not sure that these are such narrow sectoral issues. Don't forget that we have a running difference of opinion with Sri Lanka on the fishermen's issue. Every day dozens and dozens of fishermen are taken. Between two friendly neighbors, we should evolve other arrangements short of apprehending fishermen who are in fact in the high seas for earning a living and they are not deliberately crossing the maritime boundary. Likewise, when a large number of refugees make India their home, it is no longer a narrow sectoral issue. It is an issue which has tremendous implications for our own economic well-being and national, position of maintaining harmony and peace. So, where of course the issues are trivial and of a very technical nature, I agree with you. But where larger issues are involved, and river water sharing is a large issue, however, one may disagree with the perspective of the government at that time, it is a larger issue in which the consultation process must take precedence before a decision is arrived at. So I would like to suggest that foreign policy is now becoming a more complex affair. It's no longer that simple foreign policy which we used to pursue in the Nehruvian era or even in the years between Pandit Nehru and Srimati Indira Gandhi came to power. Today the foreign policy is much more complex. Domestic factors are surfacing. You see, with shrinking opportunities, and I would like to use this advisedly, shrinking doesn't mean that India is not growing, but population is growing too. There is every reason to believe that domestic compulsions, domestic interests would always have a say in foreign policy formulation. So one has to balance the two, and probably a stage has come today when a mechanism for a greater dialogue with individual states of the Union should be held on foreign policy issues. A national debate should be held on foreign policy issues so that we arrive at a composite, holistic, balanced picture which is bipartisan, non-partisan, and in which the entire country is on the same page.
Well, that's an interesting idea that something on the lines of national NDC be formed to debate foreign policy issues with the state governments and the state leadership. But that apart, there's another question which, is it also reflective of a change in our thinking, of the nation's thinking? From days when foreign policy issues were powered or shaped more by those lofty ideals of non-alignment, we are now becoming a little more practical about what needs and demands our countrymen have and tailoring our foreign policy issue towards that. Do you think the decisions or lack of it or this debate on taking a decision reflects this transitory period of moving away from one set of thought and another set of thought coming in? Do you think this is a conflict between two opinions?
Rahul, the towering personality of Panditji really papered over many domestic differences, even on foreign policy issues. And we will not go into those, but there is a debate going on in the country today, even as we speak about that. But now that India has moved away from that era of a towering personality at the helm of affairs, I think this stage may have come when we will have to take on board the views of all states of the Indian Union, even on foreign policy issues, which is a central subject according to the Constitution. And in doing so, we will have to be mindful that foreign policy at every stage, in every detail, reflects the national interests of India. The luxury of speaking from a higher pedestal on issues of international concern probably today will have to be put on the back burner, because today we have real issues, problems of development, problems of human rights, problems of keeping the country safe from external aggression of a type which no other country has faced. Terrorism, transnational crime, piracy, and not to speak about open war or proxy war, which India has been subjected to in the recent past, which might grow in fact. So taking all this into account, the voice of our chief ministers will need to be listened to, will not necessarily need to be integrated as a part of our foreign policy, but they should be carried on board so that we have a system where India's foreign policy reflects India's consensus opinion on issues of national interest.
What kind of mechanism? I mean, you have suggested a similar body like the NDC to carry forward this, but right now nothing of that sort exists. And if you look at decision making at the foreign policy level, it's done at a bureaucratic level, which essentially is a centralized service. And you are suggesting to decentralize foreign policy decision making. How do you achieve that?
No, I'm not suggesting that, but all I'm suggesting is a mechanism for dialogue. And I remember, even during my service, I used to be sent from time to time by the Prime Minister of the day to the leader of the opposition to say that this is what we plan to do. How do you look at this issue? And the leader of the opposition used to, in all probability, used to say that this is a bipartisan issue on which we have to have an agreement, national position. He would agree. And that gives strength to our foreign policy formulation. That kind of a thing should be revived. And at the state level, have a dialogue with the Chief Minister. I'm sure all these things are being done. I'm only suggesting that it should be given a strength and it should be given a formal shape and form.
Coming to Sri Lanka and the Tamil issue, which is in particular the main debate, what do you think? Is our response to the Tamil question adequate, or should we further up the ante?
There is no doubt at all that the feelings in Sri Lanka run very high. There is palpable anger. And there is also anger that the government of the day has not been able to give them any comfort on some of the issues of concern to them. So I think what the government will decide will ultimately be a result of this understanding of the domestic situation in India. And it has to find a resonance. And that resonance will be found in the ultimate decision that the government takes. I'm sure it will be a correct decision. I'm sure it will be a decision in the national interest. But all said and done, every decision has two aspects. One is the fallout of this decision in a negative sense, and the other is, of course, reflecting the people's wishes through a foreign policy position.
Well, I believe that your idea of joint mechanism or a mechanism to debate foreign policy issues with the states is taken up. It's a very interesting idea. Thank you very much.
You are listening to a discussion on India and the Commonwealth. The participants were A.N. Ram, former diplomat, and Rahul Jalali, senior journalist. It came to you in the program News Analysis, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.